Welcome back. All right, so we're going to look at the 1935-1936 season, a season where we're down to 8 teams in the National Hockey League. The last of the original 6 to win a Stanley Cup does so. It is the Detroit Red Wings. And there's some financial concerns in the National Hockey League, which, that's kind of a thing. Both Montreal teams are struggling to make ends meet. Even though the Montreal Maroons are first in the division, fans aren't going out to watch their games. The Maroons are very concerned. And the New York Americans are having their financial problems as well. So the Montreal Maroons finished first in the Canadian division. 22-16-10 overall, 54 points. The Toronto Maple Leafs 23-19-6 for 52 points. Then you have the New York Americans, 16-25-7, 39 points. And they make the playoffs for the first time since 1929. You'll notice, though, they would have been at the bottom of the American division. So you have a team miss the playoffs in the American division that would have made it in the Canadian division. Oh, and it's the Rangers. The Rangers and the Americans we'll discuss at some point soon. Montreal, the Canadiens finished last in the league, 11-27 and 11-33 points. And so miserable year for Montreal, not indicative of what's to come. The Montreal Canadiens, of course, are going to win a bunch of Stanley Cups. But we go over to the American division now, where Detroit finishes 24-16-8. They're the number 1 team in the league with 56 points. No President's Trophy curse there. Boston 22-20-6 record for 50 points. They're tied with 50 points with the other 2 teams in the division. Chicago Blackhawks 21-19-8 with 50 points, and the New York Rangers 19-17-12 to get to 50 points. So with the most wins, Boston ends up second, Chicago ends up third, and again the Rangers missed the playoffs, even though they had 11 more points than the New York Americans, who make the playoffs in the Canadian division. So, again, both Montreal teams having their struggles. The Montreal Maroons, of course, don't make it to the original 6 era. February 13th of 1936, the Montreal Canadiens make a pretty big deal with the Montreal Maroons. So, just within the city. Same building, too. So, just you play for them now. So, Toe Blake, Bill Miller, and Kevin Gravel are acquired by the Montreal Canadiens in exchange for goaltender Laurent Chabot. And of course, Toe Blake ends up being a huge figure for the Montreal Canadiens organization, so that's definitely noteworthy there. The Leafs lose in the Stanley Cup final for the 3rd time in 4 seasons. It was the 4th time they made the Stanley Cup final in 5 years. But yeah, they had lost 3 in a row after winning that first one. And then, they're a finalist, but they're just not able to get over the hump. April 7th of 1936, a playoff record is set by the Detroit Red Wings. When they score 9 goals in a 9-4 win against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So Detroit firing on all cylinders in that game. The Leafs do set a record that season, at least one of their players does. Red Horner sets an NHL record with 167 penalty minutes. Keep in mind that's a 48-game schedule, so yeah, he knew how to drop the gloves. That's a record that lasts 20 years. Of course, once the NHL schedule gets longer and once we get into the Enforcers era, 167 penalty minutes seems kind of quaint. This is the first time in NHL history that an entire division finishes above 500. So kudos to the American division on that. Of course, for the Rangers, missing the playoffs had to be kind of frustrating. The St. Louis Eagles, who did not play that season, had intended to take a year off and then try Ottawa again. They basically said to the NHL, you know what, moving to St. Louis was a mistake. We'd like to move back to Ottawa, and the NHL says no. No. So the St. Louis Eagles players are dispersed amongst the NHL after the NHL buys all of them for $35,000, and we won't see hockey in Ottawa again until 1992. The Boston Bruins also make a change. They switch their colors. So they were brown and gold. They turned to black and gold. So I guess for tomorrow I can change which logo I use for the Boston Bruins, because that's still brown and gold. I don't know how many of you can see it's brown, but it is. They switched to the black on their uniforms, which is the color they're most associated with. But you know what? I like the brown and gold. If the Bruins ever decided to go back to the brown and gold look, I wouldn't mind at all. Hawks, their owner, Frederick McLaughlin, is upset with the lack of star power play from Howie Morenz. So Howie Morenz is traded to the New York Rangers as a result of the owner of the Blackhawks not being happy with how well he's playing. So Morenz winding down his career with the New York Rangers. The Hawks make the playoffs where the Rangers don't. Your Hart Trophy winner that season, Eddie Shore of the Boston Bruins, wins it again. The rookie award goes to Mike Caracas, a goaltender for the Chicago Blackhawks. So Chicago with another goaltender. They've gone through a few, but they seem to have good success with goaltenders. Tiny Thompson is the Vezina winner for the Boston Bruins. So you have two goaltenders winning awards in the National Hockey League that year. The Lady Bing goes to Doc Romnes of the Chicago Blackhawks. So good season there. Sweeney Schreiner of the New York Americans, a big part of the reason the Americans make the playoffs and hold off Montreal. He leads the league in scoring, 48 games, 19 goals, 26 assists, 45 points. Marty Berry, now with Detroit, Boston trading him there. He has great success in Detroit. 48 games, 21 goals, 19 assists, 40 points. Paul Thompson for Chicago, 45 games, 17 goals, 23 assists, 40 points. Art Chapman for the New York Americans, 48 games, 10 goals, 28 assists for 38 points. Charlie Conacher with the Toronto Maple Leafs, 44 games, 23 goals, 15 assists, 38 points. Doc Romnes, previously mentioned, of course. So for Romnes, he plays 48 games, 13 goals, 25 assists, 38 points. Hooley Smith for the Montreal Maroons, 47 games, 19 goals, 19 assists, 38 points. And Bill Toms for the Toronto Maple Leafs, 48 games, 23 goals, 15 assists for 38 points. Apologies for the multiple pauses. Couldn't get the cat to settle down. All right, so on the goaltending front, Normie Smith for the Detroit Red Wings, 24, 16, and 8, 2.04 goals against, 6 shutouts, and he had a great playoff run as well. George Hainsworth for Toronto, 23, 19, and 6, 2.12 goals against, 8 shutouts. Tiny Thompson for the Boston Bruins, who did win the Vezina Trophy, 22, 20, and 6, 1.68 goals against average, 10 shutouts. The NHL needs to introduce some more scoring to the NHL. Mike Caracas for Chicago finishes with a record of 21, 19, and 8, 1.85 goals against average, 9 shutouts. That's how you win the Rookie of the Year award, which is set to become the Calder Trophy the following season. So the playoffs, we're still in the same weird playoff setup, where the semifinal between the two top teams is a longer series than the others, and you're still playing total goals for the quarterfinals. So in the quarters, Boston wins the first game against Toronto 3-0, and then Toronto lays the smackdown in the second game by a score of 8-3 to win the series by a total goal of 8-6. The total goals is 8-6. Chicago loses to the New York Americans in the first game 3-0. They do beat the Americans 5-4 in the second game, but they lose the total goal score by 7-5. So the Americans, in their first playoff in a while, they upset the Chicago Blackhawks. That had to be seen as a huge upset at the time. In the semifinals, the New York Americans play against Toronto. Toronto wins 3-0 or 3-1 in the first game. The Americans win 1-0 in the second game, and then Toronto wins 3-1 in the third game to win the best of 3 series 2-1. On the other side of things, Detroit beats the Montreal Maroons in 6 overtimes by a score of 1-0. So that's impressive. The second game they win 3-0. So absolutely ridiculous goals against by Normie Smith there. And then Detroit wins 2-1 in the third game to sweep the series in 3. Montreal manages 1 goal in how many periods is that? 9, 12, 15 periods? Almost 15 periods. That's a lot. Then we go to the final. Detroit wins the first game 2-1. That's at home. They win the second game at home 9-4. The third game, Toronto does stave off elimination with a 4-3 overtime win before Detroit wins in Toronto 3-2 to win the Stanley Cup, the series in 4 games. So Detroit wins their first Stanley Cup. The Toronto Maple Leafs getting to that final, not able to get over and win another championship as of yet. But yeah, Detroit's going through a pretty good era. The National Hockey League, from a financial perspective, is not. And that will be continued in upcoming videos. We'll take another look at that. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.